Hey guys, I'm Philip Molina, and after months of talking about it and dissecting it, Batman vs. Superman is finally here. And as I watched the last and final trailer for it, I realized I actually have a bunch of predictions for this movie that I haven't even told you guys about. So I'm gonna talk about some stuff I noticed in that final trailer, and a little bit about the other trailers and TV spots and stuff, and some bonus materials too. There's this book that I checked out. Lots of stuff that I'm gonna use to help analyze this trailer and give some predictions about some things that are probably gonna be in this movie. Now, if you haven't seen it yet, you can tell me what you think about my predictions below, but if you're like, I already saw this, what do I care? Just feel free to grade me on these predictions. Try not to hate too hard if I'm wrong about stuff, but I feel pretty good about some of these. All right, here goes. Let's get to it.
Master Wayne. Thermal imaging is showing me 24 hostiles on the 3rd floor. Why don't I drop you off on the 2nd?
So right off the bat, pun intended, we see some new technology to Batman's arsenal. He's got this drone-operated Batwing. And remember, in this movie, he's way into his career, so all of his tech is pretty badass at this point. This is being operated by Alfred from the Batcave. And we also get a quick look at Batman's supercomputer, which we've now found out he and Alfred built this thing together, and they keep doing upgrades to it, like they're like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in a garage somewhere or something. But you can tell, actually, because look at the old-school keyboard, and yet it also has these newer touchscreens. It's got a police scanner built in there, and that really cool drone joystick that just pops out when you need to take your drone for a spin. Again, I love that they're implying that Batman's been at this for a really long time, and they keep doing improvements and improvements. It's just a nice way to feel like that world is really lived in. Anyway, it just feels like drones are playing a much bigger role in this movie than obviously they've ever played in any of these movies, and that's not just because drones are more in the news these days. They even have an actor, Dan Amboyer. He's an Air Force drone pilot. A lot of people think he might end up turning out to be Green Lantern. I don't know if that's gonna happen. But also Lex Luthor's company, LexCorp, they develop drone technology. It just feels like a lot of things are pointing toward drone stuff. Whether or not drones play a large role in this movie, it at least shows they're definitely updating the surrounding military to keep up with the fact that this movie is coming out in 2016. Moving on. Next fight scene is immediately one of the coolest parts of the trailer. Batman just like explodes out of the floorboards. He flips a guy over his shoulder. He body slams him. He tosses a freaking flashbang grenade. He takes out some other guys, throws one guy across the room, punches a bunch of other guys, slings one guy into a wall, and then like slams this other guy into the floor. He's probably breaking that guy's neck. Like, that guy's definitely dead. My point is, Batman is just killing it here. I mean, kind of literally. And it's so fluid and such a high-level threat. A lot of people complain about the Christopher Nolan movies that the action isn't really there, at least in terms of Batman's fighting ability. It was definitely done in a way where you couldn't exactly follow his fighting because he was kind of that hide in the shadows ninja style. This is not that. This is an epic brawler that just can take on anyone and doesn't need to hide at all. Maybe the coolest thing about all this fighting here, this choreography, it's gotta be inspired by the Arkham games. That's the free flow fighting style that he uses in all the games. The body slams, the flips, the throws, the leaps. I definitely think they saw those games and were like, yeah, that's a pretty badass looking fighting style. Why don't we do that in the movie? And then they freaking did. Really, at the end of the day, I'm just happy to see a version of Batman that doesn't have to move his whole body just to turn his freaking head. Look at that. That's ridiculous. You can tell that's not even his arm on that thumbs up. That's not his arm. That's how little he can move. The 90s were a weird time. It's also just interesting again to see how much technology Batman has acquired at this point. I'm guessing here he's using at least different kinds of batarangs, grapnel gun, maybe sleeping darts, some smoke grenades. He's also got that like disruptor thing from the Arkham games. He might be using it here to disable the people's guns. We'll get back to that later. And then on top of that, the Batsuit, which in this version of it is at least bulletproof. It definitely has these lightweight plates inside of it that can repel bullets, but also the cape is fireproof, and it's definitely knife resistant. You can see some sparks flying off of his back, and that all gets assisted by the cowl, which is also full of tech. You've got the eyes. They have a part that can drop down that we see in other parts that gives them a heads-up display kind of thing, kind of like Iron Man, honestly. And then we've heard his voice, it sounds very different.
Do you bleed?
That's because he's got a throat microphone built into this thing that modulates it for him, so he doesn't have to swallow glass like Christian Bale did.
attention.
But anyway, what's really interesting about all this technology is the fact that he is now relying on this technology and his fighting style. And don't get me wrong, like I said, his fighting is insane, but the fact that he's having to maybe use more of these pieces of technology and having to invent new ways to have an upper hand, maybe that's why he says this to Alfred in a second.
I'm getting slow in my old age, Alfred.
Even you got too old to die young, not for lack of trying.
Now, we saw a shot of this Batcave in pretty much every trailer before this one, but since then we've learned a lot of details about it. Like, this is all underneath his new house, his new Wayne Manor, if you will. The old Wayne Manor is all decayed and destroyed, so he's since built a new mansion, and this is underneath that, at least partially. It's also partially underneath a lake. You can see there's that waterfall. That's not like a rich person feng shui kind of thing or something. That's basically a leaky roof, and each level has something different. On the lowest level, there's like kind of a garage situation where they keep the different cars and they're able to work on them. But there's also a whole level that's just dedicated to basically science. They have tables for repairs and inventions, but there's also tables just for science experiments and working with chemicals. And this whole design with all these levels and these sharp geometric shapes and all the glass and the falling water, that's all based on Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water River House, which is literally a house built on a river. Now, if you're thinking that this is all like crazy sophisticated or something, it makes sense that Batman's been doing this for like 20 years. He keeps improving and changing things, and his Batcave has gone through a whole round of improvements depending on what he needed at the time and what technology was available. His old Wayne Manor is out of the picture, and now he's got this thing that's basically designed just for him to be the best Batman that he can be, which is also an interesting place to find him in terms of his humanity. He's let go of the things that made him Batman before. His Wayne Manor is what was his family life, and it was always very important in the comics and even in all the other movies. And now he's in a cold, separate situation that is almost completely removed from anything that has to do with Bruce Wayne, and is almost built solely just for being Batman. I guess that's what happens when you lose someone so close to you and you get lost in your work. I'm also loving how cool Jeremy Irons is coming off his version of Alfred with his joke here. He's been a little serious in the other one.
Even you got too old to die young, not for lack of trying.
But here we're seeing him almost come off kind of like Scar, honestly. But a lot of us remember him as the main villain in Die Hard with a Vengeance, Simon Gruber. And what's great about that is that I feel like he's tapping into almost that badass that he was in those movies, where Alfred actually is not a butler in these movies. This is actually true. He's now Wayne's head of security, and they kind of rewrote his backstory so that he wasn't the family butler, he was the family bodyguard. And before that, he worked in British intelligence and he was in the Royal Marines. So maybe it's like brown leather strap he's got here. Maybe that's like a freaking gun holster or something. Like Alfred's gonna freaking shoot a bitch or something. I guess it could also just be full of like tiny little screwdrivers like for your glasses or something. But either way, this is a much more badass, cool Alfred than we've ever had. And honestly, of all the changes you could make, making Alfred into a badass assassin or something, it's a pretty welcome change, I think. All right, let's keep going.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race. If we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
Okay, so in that bit, we got a lot of stuff we're pretty familiar with at this point, and we cover a lot of it in our other Batman vs. Superman breakdown videos. But after we see the other angle of Metropolis being destroyed from Man of Steel, and Bruce running to save the little baby girl, and the shot of the people in the Dia de los Muertos makeup reaching out to Superman like he's a sort of Christ figure, over all of that, we get this new part of the exchange between Alfred and Bruce, where he says this.
If we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
Okay, I feel like this is a good place to explain what a lot of people are calling the 9/11 illusions that this movie is making. It is gonna be kind of political here for a second. I don't really care what side you're on of these politics. I'm just gonna explain to you what people think is being said in this movie and how it's similar to what really happened in our real world. So these images and Bruce's words, they're giving the Metropolis battle some real context in a political way that we can relate to, because a lot of people compare the imagery from the Man of Steel attack to the footage of New York City during the 9/11 attacks. And in the recent TV commercials, there was a part where Bruce is really driving this comparison home.
Count the dead. Thousands of people. What's next? Millions.
And then we recently found out that the Superman statue is actually on the ground zero location of the World Machine attack in Metropolis. And obviously that's a lot like how at ground zero for 9/11, they've since built a memorial there too. But why are they doing all this? It's because they want Bruce to be the exact same kind of angry that a lot of Americans were after 9/11. That way he can respond in a way that we all kind of understand, but was the same kind of weird choice that America made immediately in response to 9/11. We have to go to war right away, kind of with almost anyone that we can somehow connect to this. Bruce is even using that same kind of flawed logic that led the American government to feel justified in invading Iraq. Secretary of State at the time, Colin Powell, showed the UN all these suspicious photos of Iraq, and he said they might possibly have the capability to assemble weapons of mass destruction there. So that's really not the same as having nukes in Iraq, but that's kind of like what's going on here. If there's a 1% chance that Superman is our enemy, then we have to treat it as if it's an absolute certainty. We have to go to war. Whatever your real life politics are, the reason that there are these parallels is so that at the least you can feel like, oh, even though this is a movie about an alien and a guy that dresses up as a bat fighting and going to war, there are real emotions that do lead people to make these kinds of choices because we lived it not too long ago. But enough politics, let's move on.
The greatest gladiator match in the history of the world. God versus man. Day versus night.
You're psychotic.
That is a 3-syllable word for any thought too big for little minds.
Then some more things that we've seen before, but we get a little bit more context. There's the Batmobile skidding past Superman, but before it kind of looked like Batman was maybe ramming Superman. Here in this shot, it kind of seems like Superman's actually caught Batman by surprise and he's slamming on the brakes, and the Batmobile just kind of bounces off of Superman and unfortunately happens to go straight into the Gotham City gas station. Superman then rips off the door, and we know from that other commercial that he has probably his coolest line that he's had in any of these trailers.
The bat is dead. Bury it.
So that badass threat aside, we kept thinking that Batman was kind of hunting Superman down and threatening him like, you know, David chasing after Goliath or something. But this is all starting to make it seem like Superman is just as interested in finding Batman in Gotham and letting him know, quit it dude, game over. So it is interesting to see that they really are equally after each other. Also, quick point off of that, he doesn't want the bat signal to ever be in use again. Now I feel like Batman is specifically using the bat signal after he's been told not to basically say, F you, Superman, come at me. Moving on. Okay, we then see Batman in that new anti-Superman armor batsuit that we've seen a couple of times, but now we know this thing's made out of lead, which is super heavy too. But we've also found out that there's an internal energy source. It's kind of like how Iron Man is able to use his suit because it's internally powered, or also how Ripley in Aliens is able to use that exoskeleton because it's got its own power source. So Batman is able to move pretty easily in this really heavy lead thing. Also, you gotta remember that lead is the only material that Superman's X-ray vision doesn't work on, so I'm guessing Batman just doesn't want Superman like checking him out, like looking at his junk. Batman's not having that. He made this thing out of lead. Also, his helmet has that same kind of wiring that I was talking about earlier, where lenses come down and he can use night vision and infrared. None of that helps because Superman is just pissed at him already, and he just smashes his fancy new suit through a building, which I know you might be thinking like, hey, wasn't Batman initially pissed about all the collateral damage, and here we are knocking stuff down? But keep in mind, they do seem like they're purposely fighting in these abandoned construction areas. Here's the real question though. How is Batman even lasting in this fight? And it looks like Superman's really coming at him. So obviously we're wondering, has Batman actually built a suit that makes him withstand Superman's punches? Or what I think is more likely, did Batman do something to Superman to weaken him just enough to be able to fight him? My guess is probably. And maybe Lex had a hand in it. We then start to get into the lives that these heroes have outside of being Batman and Superman, with Lois and Clark, and also Bruce dealing with his wealth and reputation. And there's a really like cheeky, silly question here that comes up, where you see this thing where Clark jumps in like fully clothed into a bathtub with Lois, which is the kind of thing you do when you fall in love and you're in a movie and you act weirdly. But the real question that people are asking here, and it comes up a lot, did they bone? Like, have Clark and Lois been having sex? And it's a silly question that's come up for as long as Superman has been around, and it's because you always wonder, oh, how? Is that even possible? Wouldn't he just destroy her? And I know Marvel kind of recently addressed it with Jessica Jones, where it's like, well, when you put two superheroes together, they can go at it. Or when the Hulk is getting kind of excited, he actually has to like calm down because it's not gonna work. So there's just an unspoken thing here that a lot of people are wondering, like, how far along are Clark and Lois in their relationship these days? I mean, I'll admit, I'm curious. I want to know. Maybe this movie will have the answer to it. They did in the Superman Returns movies manage to have a baby together, so he's able to control himself some amount. We might get another chapter in this Clark and Lois, can they or can't they story when this movie comes out. We get a lot of action in this area, but the thing worth talking about is definitely that Batman is firing some sort of gun at Superman's head. A lot of debate again about what kind of gun this is, and the whole reason it's crazy is because Batman doesn't really use guns very often. Kind of sometimes, but not really. A lot of people think it's a grenade launcher. Some people think it's a freaking gun with a kryptonite bullet in it, which either would make sense because it would weaken Superman, but it could still be freaking crazy if that were true. Wouldn't that just like blow his freaking brains out? Probably not. He probably would survive it, and it would probably just weaken him, but I don't know. I don't know that they'll put a gun in Batman's hand that has a bullet in it that is meant to like pierce and go through Superman. If they do, it would show just how much Batman hates Superman, where he is willing to just completely assassinate him. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think here. What's going on with that gun? It looks like it could be one of the guns that we've established before as being not so terrible, but it could be a legit anti-alien gun. Then again, we get a bunch of stuff we've kind of seen before, but in this fight, in these quick cuts, there's some really cool stuff, especially this moment where Superman blocks this kick and he throws armored Batman across the room. That kick is exactly a panel in The Dark Knight Returns, and that comic series has one of the best all-time stories of Batman, and it's really clear just how much inspiration they're getting from that thing, and that again is totally fine with me. It's such a great story. I'll put a link in the description. Go ahead and buy that thing and read it. It's one of the best Batman stories in general, let alone the fact that it's a lot of inspiration for this movie. Then when we see that explosion that we've seen before, I started to at least think like, oh, you know who we don't see in this trailer is Doomsday. I feel like DC did that on purpose because a lot of people complained about Doomsday being too much, and they obviously don't want to show any more footage than they already showed of the guy. So they kind of lean more into showing more Wonder Woman footage, and no one's really complaining about that. We can learn a little bit more about Wonder Woman. I think that was a really deliberate move, and I think it was probably a smart one.
I've known a few women like you.
I don't think you've ever known a woman like me.
Then we get this new exchange of Bruce talking to Diana, and it feels like it's a different moment than we've seen from them before. But what I really like about it is that obviously they're flirting like crazy, and he says that he's known a few women like her, and she's like, not quite like me. What's cool about that is that you might hear that and think, oh, well, Bruce has been around. But remember, again, 20 years of being Batman in this universe, Bruce is probably talking about some pretty intense, crazy ladies. Selena Kyle, Talia al Ghul. He's right. He's known some powerful, very charming, intriguing women, but she's also right. None of them have been like her. And what's really cool about that is, what is she like? She's almost like a god in her own powers, right? A goddess. She gets her powers from the ancient Greek gods, and if anything, she's very similar to what Superman is like. So it's not just this complicated thing where he's mad at this guy and he's having this side love story, B story kind of rom-com thing. He's attracted to the exact same kind of person that he hates, and that is going to be a really interesting thing for him to figure out later. Remember when she shows up and, you know, is
She with you?
I thought she was with you.
when that happens, if he realizes that's Diana, that's gonna actually put him in a place of like, oh crap, the whole thing I've been fighting against, it can be packaged in a much prettier figure with her. So maybe it's not just Doomsday that makes them bury their beef and work together. Maybe it's the fact that he realizes this woman that he's pretty into is close to as powerful as Superman, and she seems like a good one, right? This next section has this pretty epic leap that Wonder Woman makes. She's got this badass sword now. We've since found out this sword has its own magical nature. And if you remember, one of the only things that Superman is vulnerable to is magic. So yeah, that sword could theoretically be used against him, but if it can be used against him and he's a Kryptonian, who's the other Kryptonian in the movie? General Zod is used to create Doomsday. So maybe that sword that she has is part of the key to defeating Doomsday. We'll see. Then there's this moment where Lois looks looks like she might drown. And I definitely think they were foreshadowing this in the earlier bathtub scene, but a lot of people think that there's more going on in this shot than we can tell. There's like an orange glow at the bottom that looks like it could be maybe Doomsday's version of heat vision or something, or some people think Aquaman might show up in this moment. But also remember that in the other trailers, we've seen that there's a lot going on with the waterboard doing some sort of testing, and there's all that water coming off of that building that looks like it's used in Doomsday's creation. I feel like water is going to play a major role in the plot of this movie. Then we go back to that fight scene that we saw earlier where he jumped up to the floor, and one, I love this point of view where he looks down on them from the rafters like he's stalking them like some sort of predator. But two, he uses what looks like here could be a disruptor to disable all of their guns, and that would be another direct reference to the Arkham video games. All right, let's keep going.
You know the oldest lie in America? That power can be innocent.
And then we see some more stuff we've seen before. And remember, I know I'm skipping a lot of this stuff, but we've covered a lot of it in our other trailer breakdown, so I'm trying to stick to mostly the new stuff. So here in this section, the part that actually worries me the most is Martha Kent being very shocked and then dropping a pot of coffee. Then we see Lois consoling Superman. I'm really worried about Martha Kent. He lost his dad back in Man of Steel. The only thing they could do, they're not gonna get rid of Lois. Are they gonna kill Martha Kent or at least hurt her severely? I kind of hope not, just because I really like Diane Lane in that role, especially now that she's coming off a little bit tougher than Martha Kent has come off sometimes in the past.
You don't know this world a thing.
But I don't know, like if they want it to be really legit serious, yeah, kill the guy's mom and he's gonna be freaking furious. That said, I don't think Batman would do that. Again, I'm not confirming that she dies, but if she does, who do you think does it? Then we get more of that desert sequence that again is probably a dream, but we get this wide shot of Batman overlooking like this terrible skyline and everything's just gone to hell. And then you see that huge Omega symbol, and it's all obviously a reference to Darkseid. And all of this suddenly reminded me of something. In the comics, Darkseid travels to the distant future and is just destroyed everything. And that kind of feels like what could be going on here. It doesn't look like modern day Earth has been destroyed. It looks like it could be the distant future. I wonder if they're borrowing that storyline. If they are bringing in this time travel story, that actually, aside from the Flashpoint stuff with Flash, we haven't seen that much of that in the DC universe, not in the comics, like in the films or in the TV shows. So it would feel like an original story to do with the Justice League. I wonder if they're gonna do that. Time travel is a pretty big way to set yourself apart from the Marvel movies too. And then finally, we get to the craziest shot from this entire trailer. Batman blocks Superman's punch. And right there, a million nerds were like, what? Like the same face that Superman makes, a bunch of nerds made, except Superman has a very handsome chiseled face and us nerds are more like, duh. But we still were all equally as shocked as he was. And again, it brings up that question. How is Batman doing that? When you're watching this, it does feel like this is in the middle of that fight that we've seen a lot of footage from throughout the rest of the trailer. So does it feel like maybe Batman has done something in the middle of that fight to suddenly weaken Superman? Or maybe it was a kryptonite bullet or a kryptonite something that it's finally taken effect now, made it so Batman actually is stronger than Superman? That would be very crazy, but it would totally level the playing field, and it's a really unlevel one to start with, so it actually is kind of fair that he would fight dirty, if you know what I mean. Also, I just want to point out, like I said, we've seen a lot of this fight from the trailers, but we also saw a lot of that Deadpool action scene from the trailers, the one on the highway. And honestly, when I saw the movie, I still really liked that whole scene, and there was a lot of stuff we didn't see, and it still totally lived up to it. So I think there's enough that they're not showing us in this big epic fight scene that I'm still really pumped about it. There's no way they showed us the best moments. It's gonna be this huge epic fight scene. At least that moment is gonna live up to the whole Batman versus Superman hype. Maybe it'll only be that scene that lives up to it, or maybe not, but we'll definitely find out pretty soon. Alright guys, I know there was a lot of stuff that I felt like I just kind of skipped over, but again, we dissected the hell out of that same footage in our other Batman vs. Superman video. Go watch that other video. I analyzed everything, including the freaking artwork in the background. But if there's anything I did miss from this trailer specifically that is not in the other trailers, definitely hit me up on Twitter at Fimo. You can also let everybody else know in the comments below, and follow at New Rockstars to find out when our videos are coming out. I'm gonna throw one last question at you. Feel like I already started a big fight as soon as I asked that question. Let me know what you guys think. That's it. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.